I didn't plan to return to the attic so soon. After reading the first letter, I told myself I would wait. But some things, once disturbed, deserve time to settle back into silence. But the box did not feel finished with me. All night, I couldn't shake the sense that something inside it was awake. When I unlocked the chest again, I noticed something I swear hadn't been there before. One of the envelopes was no longer sealed. It rested near the top of the stack, slightly shifted as if it had been handled recently. The paper was thinner than the others. Its edges darker, more brittle, marked by time and something else I can't quite name. There was no date on the front, no name, only a single word, written in uneven ink. Before. I don't know who placed it there, I don't know when it was written, but as I lifted the letter from the box, I realized something unsettling. This wasn't a continuation of the story. It was a warning that came before everything fell apart, and once again, I don't think it was meant to be read. I didn't sleep after opening the first letter. Not because of fear alone, but because the attic no longer felt empty. The image of that envelope stayed with me, the faint outline pressed from the inside, like a fingerprint that hadn't been there before. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a stain revealed by age. But the more I replayed the moment, the less convincing that explanation became. By morning, the house was quiet again. Too quiet. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking as if the attic itself was aware of my return. The chest was exactly where I had left it, locked, untouched, and yet, something felt wrong the moment I knelt beside it. When I opened the lid, the scent of old paper rose once more, but sharper this time, mixed with something metallic and cold. The letters were no longer neatly stacked. One envelope rested apart from the others, placed deliberately near the top as if it wanted to be seen first. It was thinner than the rest. The paper darkened unevenly as though it had absorbed more than just time. There was no date, no seal, no name written across the front, only a single word, scratched in trembling ink. Before. I hesitated longer than I'd like to admit. The last letter had warned me, whatever follows you after reading this, do not let it in. And yet here I was, standing in the same attic, holding another piece of the past between my fingers, knowing full well that some doors do not close once. Opened at as I unfolded the page, I realized something unsettling. The handwriting was different, younger, less controlled, as if whoever wrote this had not yet learned how to hide their fear. The letter did not begin with love. It did not begin with longing. It began with urgency and with a sentence that made my chest tighten. If you are reading this, then the box that has already been opened and what we tried to stop has begun. The words lingered in the air long after I'd finished reading that first line. What we tried to stir, my hands tightened around the fragile paper. This letter wasn't written to be remembered, it was written to prevent something. And whoever held the pen believed time itself could be used as a barrier, a way to delay. The ink faded and returned in uneven strokes, as though the writer paused often, listening for something that never fully arrived. They wrote of a house long before it became silent, when laughter still echoed through its halls, and the attic was nothing more than a storage space for forgotten furniture. Back then, the box did not exist. The letters had not yet been gathered, and the name Eleanor had not yet become a warning. The writer described a winter that came early, one that wrapped the valley in frost before the leaves had fallen. On the nights they mentioned, the household gathered below, unaware that someone had climbed the narrow attic stairs for the first time, not to hide something away, but to retrieve it, a single letter. The writer confessed that this first letter had never been meant to leave the house. It was written in haste, born from fear, and sealed before its truth could be reconsidered. Inside it was a confession that named the fire, the brother who survived it, and the promise made in the aftermath, a promise that, if broken, would awaken something tied not to blood alone, but to the walls of the house itself. As I read, I felt a strained recognition settle in. The letter spoke of rules and spoken ones, that nothing written about him should ever be stored in one place, that no letter should remain alone, and above all, that the attic must remain sealed once the box was complete. The writer ended this section with a warning, pressed so hard into the page that the paper thinned beneath it. The box was not built to keep the letters safe. It was built to keep something else contained. I lowered the page slowly, my breath shallow. If this letter came before everything, then the box wasn't a relic of memory. It was a precaution, and somehow, it had failed. The letter grew heavier as I've continued reading, not in weight, but in intention. Whoever wrote it no longer sounded uncertain. The hesitation from earlier lines gave way to something firmer, eyes shaped by fear that had already proven itself real. They wrote about the decision to build the box, not as a container for memories, but as a measure of control. The writer described how the house had begun to change after the fire. Small things at first. Doors left ajar that had been closed. Footsteps echoing where no one stood. A sensation of being watched not from the shadows, but from the walls themselves. The brother's survival had not gone unnoticed. Something had followed him back. Something that did not care for names or faces, only for what had been promised in the aftermath of the flames. The box, they explained, was constructed from old oak taken from a fallen tree behind a manor wood that had already been split by lightning years earlier. Iron was chosen for the hinges, not for strength, but for its weight. And inside the lid, carved so faintly it could only be seen in certain light, was a symbol meant to confuse whatever listened from within the house. The writer admitted they didn't know if it would work, only that gathering the letters, every confession, every truth spoken too late into one place felt safer than letting them exist alone. Each letter, they believed, carried a fragment of attention. Together, they could be contained. But then came the line that made me pause. The box must never be opened more than once. The writer described a ritual of sorts. The attic sealed, the key hidden, the house left behind. They believed that, as long as the letters remained unread, the presence tied to them would remain dormant or aware, perhaps. But restrained as I reached the end of the page, my eyes drifted to the chest beside me. The lock was old, scarred, scratched, as if someone had tried desperately to force it open long ago, and suddenly, I understood something I hadn't before. The box had been opened before me, and whoever did it never finished what they started. The next section of the letter felt different. The handwriting wavered again, as though the writer had returned to the page days later, changed by something they hadn't planned to witness. Ink bled into the fibers of the paper in places where the pen lingered too long, pressing down as if hesitation alone could alter what had already happened. They wrote about the first attempt to open the box. It was not done in secret, nor with curiosity. It was done out of fear. The brother had been gone for weeks. No note, no tracks in the snow. Only the uneasy sense that he hadn't truly left, just moved somewhere unseen. The house, the writer confessed, had grown restless in his absence. Floors creaked without reason. Cold drafts slipped through sealed rooms. And every night, the attic stairs seemed closer than before, as if the house itself was encouraging someone to climb them. It was Eleanor who insisted the box be opened. She believed the letters might explain what the brother had taken with him or what he had left behind. Against every warning, against the rules they had sworn to follow, they carried the chest into the light for the first time since it was sealed. The writer described the sound a lock made when it turned, not a click but a dull, hollow shift, like something heavy settling deeper into place. Inside, the letters lay untouched, exactly as they had been arranged. Nothing leapt out, nothing moved at first. They felt relief, but when Eleanor reached for the top envelope, the candle beside them flickered violently. The flame bent inward, drawn toward the box, and the air grew thick, almost difficult to breathe. The writer grabbed her wrists before she could break the seal. They closed the lid immediately. That night, Eleanor fell ill. She spoke in half-phrases, repeating names no one recognized. She claimed someone had been standing at the foot of her bed, reading over her shoulder, and when the fever finally broke, she refused to enter the attic. Refused, even to look at the stairs. The writer ended this section with a single sentence, written smaller than the rest. Some things do not punish disobedience immediately. They wait. I folded the page slowly, aware now of how close I was standing to the chest. The scratches on the lock suddenly felt less like damage and more like restraint. The letter did not say how long Eleanor remained ill, only that she was never the same afterward. The writer described a quiet transformation, subtle enough to be ignored by those who didn't know her well, but unmistakable to someone who loved her. She stopped humming while she worked. Her laughter vanished first, followed by her appetite, then her sleep. At night, she insisted on keeping every door in the house closed, even in the heat of summer, and always, without fail. She asked if the attic was locked. The writer admitted they began to lie to her. They told her the key had been thrown into the river, that the box had been dismantled, that nothing remained in the attic but dust and empty space. But Eleanor never believed them. She listened in silence, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, as though she could hear something moving above them. Weeks later, the first letter arrived. Not one of the confessions meant for the box, but a new letter, left on the kitchen table without explanation. The handwriting did not match the brothers', it did not match Eleanor's, it did not match anyone the writer knew. It contained only one sentence: "You have reminded it how to listen." After that, the house began to mark time differently. Clocks stopped without reason. Candles burned unevenly, their wax pooling in shapes the writer refused to describe. And sometimes, when the writer stood alone in a quiet room, they felt the unmistakable pressure of being observed, not watched, but read, as though their thoughts were being examined line by line. The writer confessed that they understood, then why the letters had to be gathered, why silence had been treated as protection. Each word spoken aloud, each truth written down, seemed to sharpen whatever had been stirred inside the house. The final paragraph on the page was stained, the ink smeared as if written in haste or panic. "Eleanor says it knows my name now. She says it learned it when the box was opened, and if it can learn one name, it can learn them all." I set the letter down carefully, aware of my own breathing. The attic felt closer than before, its air heavier, pressing in on me. For the first time since finding the box, I wondered if reading these letters wasn't uncovering the past but teaching something in the present how to remember. The next page was thinner, its edges uneven, as though it had been torn from a larger sheet in haste. The handwriting was smaller now, tighter, each line pressed close to the next as if space itself had become scarce. The writer did not call it a disappearance. They called it an absence. Eleanor was gone by morning, her bed untouched, her shoes still by the door. The house bore no signs of struggle, no broken locks, no disturbed furniture. Only the attic key was missing from its hiding place beneath a loose floorboard. The writer searched for her through the surrounding fields, through the garden paths where they once met in secret, even down to the river where lies had been promised. No one had seen her leave. No one had heard her scream. But the attic door stood open. Inside, the chest remained where it had always been, heavy and unmoved. The lock, however, hung slightly askew, as though it had been turned and then forced back into place. The writer and described the smell first burnt wax and old paper before they described the letters themselves. Several envelopes were no longer sealed. Some had been opened carefully, others torn, and one letter, newer than the rest, stack, written in Eleanor's hand. The writer confessed they did not read it immediately. They knew instinctively that once they did, there would be no returning to the version of the world that existed before her absence. But by nightfall, silence pressed too hard to ignore. Eleanor's letter contained no farewell. It spoke instead of understanding, of realizing that the box did not hold memories, but invitations. That every letter opened widened something unseen, allowing it to reach farther into the house, into the people who lived there. Her final line was underlined, twice, the ink torn through the page. I am not leaving you. I am staying where it cannot follow. The writer ended this section with a single broken sentence, and then the attic closed itself. I looked up instinctively, my gaze drawn to the ceiling above me. The chest sat silent at my side, its presence heavier than before. If Eleanor had chosen to disappear to protect what remained, then opening the box again had undone her sacrifice. The letter that followed was harder to read, not because the words were unclear, but because the writer no longer tried to explain them. There was no panic left in the ink, only exhaustion. Days passed without Eleanor, though the writer stopped marking time altogether. The house no longer responded to routines. Rooms felt smaller, as if the walls had leaned inward. Listening, the attic remained sealed, not by lock or key, but by something heavier, an unspoken refusal. No matter how many times a writer approached the stairs, their feet would not climb them. They wrote that the silence had become watchful, not empty, not calm, attentive. At night, the writer heard the faint scrape of paper against wood, drifting down through the beams, a sound like pages being turned slowly, carefully, as though someone were reading by touch alone. They stopped lighting candles altogether, fearing the way flames had once bent toward the box. It was then that the decision was made. The writer gathered what remained of the letters, the unopened confessions, the warnings, the fragments of truth never meant to share space. Each one was returned to the chest, sealed again with wax and iron, not to preserve them, but to deny them an audience. The key was not destroyed. It was hidden where it could be found, but only by someone who wasn't looking for it. The writer explained this without justification, as if they already understood how it would sound to anyone reading later. They believed that intention mattered, that the box would resist those driven by curiosity, but yield to someone drawn by something else, loss perhaps, or inheritance. Before leaving the house for the last time, the writer carved a mark inside the chest's lid, the same symbol that now, a century later, I had seen etched faintly into the wood. They ended this section with a quiet admission. I do not expect forgiveness, only distance. I folded the letter and sat back on my heels, the weight of it settling slowly in my chest. The box beside me was no longer just an object. It was a decision, carried forward in time, and somehow it had reached me. The final letter in this sequence was different from all the others. It was shorter, cleaner, as if the writer had stripped away every unnecessary word, leaving only what absolutely needed to be said. The handwriting was steady and nervingly suggesting that whatever fear once guided the pen had finally settled into certainty. This is not a confession, the letter began. It is a boundary. The writer addressed whoever might find the box in the future, though they never used the word reader. Instead, they referred to them as the one who listens. They warned that the letters were not memories frozen in ink, but echoes, each one capable of repeating what had already been spoken, feeding the same attention that once filled the house. They wrote that the box had been left behind intentionally, not abandoned, not forgotten. The house itself, they believed, would eventually empty, but the box needed to remain where it could be found once and only once more. The letters will tolerate one witness, the writer claimed, but not a keeper. They cautioned against reading aloud. I guess returning to the attic after nightfall. I guess trying to make sense of the order in which the letters were written. Meaning, they insisted, was not the danger. Recognition was. The most unsettling line came near the end, written smaller than the rest, as though the writer hoped it might be overlooked. If you feel the need to gather them, to organize them, to share them, then it has already noticed you. The letter ended without a signature, but with an instruction carved into the margin in faint, deliberate strokes. Leave the box open when you are finished. It will know you are done. I lowered the page slowly, my throat dry. The chest beside me was still open, and for the first time since I'd climbed into the attic, I wondered whether stopping now would be enough or if simply reaching this point had already made me the kind of witness the writer warned against. I remained there longer than I should have. The letter lay open in my hands, its warning echoing louder than any sound the house could make. One witness, not a keeper. I told myself that reading was not the same as claiming. That observation alone did not bind me to what the box contained. But the longer I stood in the attic, the less certain that distinction became. The chest waited. It did not creak. It did not shift. It simply remained open, patient in a way only inanimate things can be, objects that do not hurry because time bends toward them regardless. I noticed then how the air felt different around it, warmer somehow, as though the space it occupied. I had absorbed too many secrets to ever feel empty again. I gathered the letters slowly, resisting the urge to straighten them, to impose order. Each envelope slid back into place with a soft sound, like breath settling in a quiet room. I did not read another word. I did not search for names or dates. I refused to listen any further than I already had. When the last letter was returned to the chest, I hesitated. The final instruction echoed in my mind. Leave the box open when you are finished. My hands hovered over the lid. Closing it felt instinctive, protective, but instinct, I had learned, was often what led others here in the first place. Instead, I stepped back and left the box exactly as it was, exposed and silent. Nothing happened. No sound, no movement, no sudden chill in the air. And somehow that unsettled me more than any visible sign ever could. As I turned toward the attic stairs, I felt it then, not a presence, not a voice, but a shift, like the subtle awareness of being noticed and then dismissed. I did not look back. I left the attic before the light began to fade. Some stories end with answers. This one ended with understanding. The letter was never meant to explain what the house became, only why silence was chosen over truth. Eleanor did not vanish to escape the past. She stayed behind to contain it. And the box was not built to preserve love or memory or guilt. It was built to hold a decision. I did not return to the attic that night. And when I finally did, days later, the chest was exactly as I had left it. Open, quiet, unremarkable, as though nothing inside it had ever carried weight enough to bend a life out of shape. This letter is finished now. Its warning has been heard, but the box is not empty. There are still dozens of envelopes resting inside it, written by different hands, in different years, under different kinds of fear. Letters of love that were never forgiven. Confessions that arrived too late. Truths hidden not to deceive, but to survive. Each one is its own story. Each one ends here. If you want to hear them not as continuations, but as echoes, then stay. Subscribe to this channel and return to the attic when the next letter is opened. Because some stories do not ask to be remembered. They wait to be found.